Right now, Mike McGarry for the Press of Atlantic City, AC Press McGarry Twitter X. Mike, welcome in. How you doing today?
Hey guys, how are you?
Doing pretty good. So before we get to the Philly stuff, I want to get your reaction to, we're 4 days away from Eagles training camp, and the reporting basically has been confirmed by players, by reporters, by everyone who apparently can get a microphone and have a podcast, because everyone has a podcast now, it seems like, that basically the problem last year was coaching, Mike McGarry. So if the problem last year was coaching, in your mind, is Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio enough of a fix for the Eagles?
Well, we're going to find out, right? We're going to see what those two highly touted coordinators have. I think that Kellen Moore probably has a bit more pressure on him than Vic Fangio, only because it'll be more visible there. I thought Jalen Hurts took a step backwards last season, did not play as well as he had the year before. And obviously the Eagles have invested a lot of money in Jalen Hurts, and they need him to bounce back to what he was in the year they went to the Super Bowl. So was it coaching? Was it Jalen Hurts? Was the offensive line not as good as they were in the past? Was the defense? Did the defense get old? Was it the lack of linebackers? All I know is that last year didn't end well, and the Eagles are going to have to show me this season why this season is going to be different than how last year ended.
For you, what is the biggest individual? You mentioned the pressure being on Kellen Moore. Is he the biggest individual, or is there somebody else that you're keeping a closer eye on than Kellen Moore going into this season?
To me, the whole thing is Jalen Hurts. Who is Jalen Hurts? How good is Jalen Hurts? Is Jalen Hurts the guy who led the Eagles to the Super Bowl? Is Jalen Hurts that season? He was a guy who could make plays with his legs. I don't know how many times I looked at the TV, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 6. He's able to scramble, get 8, 9 yards, or avoid rush and hit a guy downfield. He just seemed to make so many big plays. Last year, he didn't seem to play with that lack of abandon. How many times did we see him start to run around the end? All of a sudden, he was confronted by a defensive back or cornerback, and he slid to the ground. He didn't even try to challenge or juke past him. So, to me, the number one guy that I'm looking at, and I think the guy with the most pressure on him, is, well, let me say 1A. 1 is Jalen Hurts. 1A is Nick Sirianni.
Hey, Mike, it's Nick. I want to ask you about Nick Sirianni heading into next season. They've kind of talked about him being like the manager, the CEO of the team, by hiring these new coordinators. Howie Roseman had a lot of input on that. Now, what are you expecting out of Sirianni, and how much pressure is he under heading into the season?
Well, I think what I would like to see from Nick Sirianni is just some maturity, right? I'm not a fan of his sideline antics at all. I'm not a fan of that whole big Dom thing, that fracas that started out on the field. I just think that's ridiculous too. So what I'm looking for from Nick Sirianni is some maturity, specifically with the sideline behavior. I don't have a problem with him being a CEO coach. It's hard enough to run the game in the NFL, right? Be the head coach, keep track of all you have to keep track of, and not call every single play. In fact, I'm old enough to remember around here when Andy Reid would get criticized because he was calling every single play and wasn't paying enough attention to running the game. So if Sirianni can run the game, there's nothing wrong with being a CEO coach. Bill Parcells was a CEO coach. Belichick, to a degree, is a CEO coach. He's not calling every defense or offensive play. Have your impact on it and run the team and run the game. But from Sirianni, I'm just looking for more maturity.
Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City joining us here on the Sports Bash at AC Press McGarry on Twitter X. Josh Hedday, Nick Earnshaw filling in on the Sports Bash on a happy hour Friday. Mike, speaking of summertime, being happy, flip over to the Phillies, finally returning from the All-Star break. What is your takeaway of who and what the Phillies are coming into the second half?
Well, right now, as of whatever today is, July 18th, 19th, whatever it is,
yeah.
19th, they're the best team in baseball. Now, will they be the best team in baseball on October 1st? I bet you Phillies fans hope they will be. But right now, the Phillies, to me, are the best team in baseball and the favorite to win the World Series.
So if they're the favorite to win the World Series, does that necessitate them still to make moves at the deadline?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to get this team better. When you have a team like this that's the favorite to win the World Series 10 days before the trade deadline, you better make sure that you make moves to keep that status or put you over the top. So, yes, we've talked about the moves, a bullpen arm, a right-handed hitting outfielder. Yeah, they need to make some moves without a doubt. Because not only, Josh, people might say, well, I don't want to give up the young players, and the Phillies have enough talent. They got a $300 million first baseman. They got a $300 million shortstop. They got a $170 million number two starter. They got a $100 million guy in right field. They got an $80 million designated hitter. They got a $100 million catcher, right? So people would say that's enough talent. But if you don't make a move, the team itself, the players in that clubhouse are going to be let down and disappointed. And that might knock them down a peg or two. So when I say you're the favorite to win the World Series, that means, it could be a pitch here, a pitch there, a catch there, a base hit here. The margin for error is very small on either side of it. So, yeah, they need to do whatever they can to make this roster the best it can be because they have a chance to win it all. And how many times in the Phillies, history have you been able to say that in July?
Mike, I mean, the Mason Miller sweepstakes and the conversation is kind of heated up, especially since they played the A's this past weekend before the All-Star break. Are you someone who's willing to part ways with one of the top three prospects to go get a Mason Miller, whether it's a Painter, a Miller, or a Justin Crawford? Is it worth it to go for it and give up some of those guys who are at the top of the farm system?
Absolutely. I'm trading any of those prospects. If I could get Mason Miller in here, look what Mason Miller does for your bullpen. Now, there's some question marks with Mason Miller, right? A little bit of elbow trouble there, innings questions. But if you can get that guy in here for this year, look what he does to your bullpen, pushing everybody down a notch, pushing Hoffman down a notch, Alvarado down a notch. To me, he really makes what is one of baseball's best bullpens, maybe the best bullpen in baseball. And I'm trading prospects. Listen, guys, I'm not a prospect guy, all right? I blame the internet for this. For many things that the internet does well, one of the internet's biggest problems is it lets fans know about these prospects. These guys often don't pan out. I mean, how many times were we sitting by now? Mick Abel, Painter, and Griff McGarry were supposed to be in the starting rotation, leading the Phillies to the National League East. Neither of them here, and in two of the cases, Painter and McGarry, or Abel and McGarry, it doesn't look like they might ever get here. So if you can trade prospects for an actual living, breathing guy who throws the ball 103 miles per hour, load the prospects up on the bus, get them to the airport, and get the real baseball player here, and let the prospects who exist out in the fans' internet imaginary minds go.
With that all being said, Mike, let's say Mason Miller is not able to be had by the Phillies for whatever reason. If it's another team gives up a prospect that the A's are more interested in, or maybe the A's are like, look, we don't want to give up Mason Miller because if he wins the Rookie of the Year, we can get a comp pick out of it, basically. So if Mason Miller is not the guy, is there like a level of, hey, I'm willing to go out and get this level of player, like a minimum or a maximum, because there's been a lot of names thrown around out there?
Yeah, I mean, look, if Mason Miller is not your guy, then maybe you pivot to Kyle Finnegan and Lane Thomas out of Washington, that outfield relief pitching duo right there. I think you need a bullpen arm and you need a right-handed hitter. Finnegan's got closing experience. I think he'd fit in well here. Obviously, you're not going to give up the prospects for Finnegan that you would give up for Mason Miller. But Mason Miller, to me, is your dream guy. If you said, who's your number one guy you want the Phillies to have on when the trade deadline happens, to me, it would be Mason Miller. If you can't get Mason Miller, then you start going down that list. I think Finnegan is a good sort of, number two choice to Mason Miller being a number one.
Mike, I want to ask you, which would you prioritize more if you're the Phillies at the deadline? Would it be an arm out of the bullpen, or upgrading the outfield and getting that right-handed bat? Because if Mason Miller's, if you have to give up a ton to get him and the asking price is just way too high, do you kind of then pivot? All right, maybe we go get somebody else to be an arm out of the bullpen to add there, like someone a little bit lower level, and then really prioritize the bat? Which way are you thinking there?
I'm going bullpen, guys. I'm going arm. Look at what happened last year. Now, the offense went cold, but one of the real reasons they had problems against the Diamondbacks is that bullpen went south in the last couple of games, right? Kimbrel wasn't any good. Kirkring wasn't any good. So I think you can never go wrong with adding arms to the bullpen and giving the manager more choices. The more arms he has confidence in to go to in that bullpen, the more choices he has, the better he can manage the game. So to me, you can never go wrong. I think especially postseason pitching rules, give me arms and choices out of that bullpen. So if you ask me, do I want the bullpen arm or the hitter? If I had a choice, I'm going the bullpen arm.
He's Mike McGarry. Follow him on Twitter, X at AC Press McGarry. Of course, he is the Press of Atlantic City's Mr. Everything over there, covering everything from high school sports to the Phillies and more. Mike, appreciate you making some time for us here on a Friday. Have a good weekend, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, guys. Nice talking to you. We'll see you down the road. Thanks.